I gotta get something off my chest. Pokemon gimmicks are starting to piss me off. Don't get me wrong, I love myself a good Mega Kangaskhan as much as the next guy, but I feel like Game Freak sometimes doesn't think through some of their decisions for something that is quite literally the face of their new games. Don't believe me?
Then check this out. Ready now?
In this video, I'm going to talk about the history of Pokemon gimmicks, their highs, their lows, and their overall effect that they've instilled on the Pokemon franchise, especially Gen 6 and beyond, and discuss a general overview of how, in my opinion, Game Freak does gimmicks right and how they do them wrong. So let's take a trip back to late 2013, shall we? You crack open your copy of X and Y, excited but a bit confused as the fanbase has been riled up at the idea of Mega Evolutions. Some saying they make the game too easy, and some people think it's a fresh new change. And these are the correct people. Mega Evolution made weak Pokemon strong and strong Pokemon stronger. It wasn't required to beat the game. Some NPCs, albeit very few, wielded the ability themselves, and come on, this is so sick. Part of the reason it was so beloved was because above all else, the way it tied into the world building of Pokemon was flawless, taking the power of friendship to a whole new level, going as far to add history to the origins of Megas, new Pokedex entries, and spinning back with another 48 new Megas for Oras. It was beautiful. The downside, it destroyed competitive. If you didn't have a Mega on your team, you lost. Unless Geomancy Xerneas was able to clutch up. And listen, I'm just gonna nip this point in the bud. If you think a gimmick is bad because it's not healthy for the competitive meta, grow up. Either deal with it or pick one of the many formats in Pokemon's competitive history, almost all of them holstering a small community within, and play without said gimmick. Or through your in-game playthrough, just don't use it. The reason I say this is, well, most importantly, Pokemon is a kid's game first. I think it goes without saying anyone at any age can enjoy Pokemon for any reason, and can want to find the level of challenge that's right for them, whether it be through nuzlocking your journey through the Isles of Peak or meticulously grinding up the competitive ladder after you shelled out 40 good boy points to get the game-winning pouch beasts. I'm just trying to say, when I'm discussing gimmicks in this video, the most I'll consider their OP-ness is to the extent it affects the actual game. Even then, I'll be lenient, because these gimmicks are almost always optional. And again, for my comp sweats, you can find formats where certain gimmicks don't exist. Or if you're really up enough opinion elitist, you could maybe get it banned, but that's wishful thinking. Before you get butthurt in the comments, just understand, I hear you, I can get behind some of your points, and I can agree it objectively does suck when the competitive scene, a very large and flourishing part of the fan base, is hindered. But again, the reason I'm not really going to discuss the competitive side of gimmicks for the most part is simply, I'm more invested in Pokemon as a franchise from a more whimsical standpoint. A semi-casual standpoint, if you will. There are solutions to your problems already out there in the competitive marketplace, and I want to talk about the lore, mechanics, and journey. Honestly, meta this, meta that.
Have you ever met a fucking girl before?
Gen 7 didn't quite hit the nail on the head like Kalos did, but they still did a phenomenal job. Wrong image. There we go, that's right. You thought I was about to glaze Z crystals? Nah, the totems were hitting. In all seriousness, the gimmicks introduced in Gen 7 were incredible because some aspects of these games were completely different from anything we've seen before. And although I think Totem Pokemon were a much stronger and underrated gimmick compared to Z Crystals, I actually think they go hand in hand to make a beautiful, unforgettable experience. I mean, hey, I love beating up the first gym rock-type leader for the billionth time like anyone else does, but let's be real here. Could you imagine how much more boring it would be if you hopped from island to island fighting regular gyms? It would be like eating McDonald's in a Hawaii. I came here for something new. Pairing that with the fact Gen 7 was one of the most hand-holdy games when it came to cutscenes, and the whole adventure would feel almost touristy. But what we actually got was a grand quest through these Hawaiian-based islands with plenty of nature, ancient trials, monstrous beasts, and instead of manufactured badges, you get ancient sparkly murder crystals. I mean, I could make an entire video alone on how the Totem Pokemon completely change how the battles are fought and planned for compared to a gym leader. I will say though, Z crystals were cool, but I think we can all agree they were way too strong and sometimes unpredictable. I would have preferred if they nerfed the base power a bit in exchange for some more secondary effects. Or some goddamn effort on the animations. But they definitely felt a lot more valuable to me than the badges because you could actually use them. Honestly, I think part of the reason I love Gen 7 so much is despite the constant interruptions, it really gives me that old school adventure vibe. Back when you journeyed through the 8-bit countryside, eventually finding small towns to rest at, compared to say Sword and Shield, that to me felt a bit too urbanized at times. I'm not really exploring, adventuring, and pioneering as much as I'm city hopping and completing a... What do you even call what you do in Pokemon? A sport? Because I feel like there were way too many people watching me in Sword and Shield for it to not be a sport. Like, we are far out of questing territory right now. Why do I need a sponsor? Anyway, perfect segue, Dynamax. Oh boy. well, at least we have a gimmick that I can use to show what not to do. As some of you may have gathered throughout these videos, I hate Gen 8. I'm sorry, I think it's genuinely the worst generation. Anyway, Dynamax. Pokemon Big. Why? Space alien. Literally, the inspiration for Dynamax was,
Kids can play games on their TVs now, so, you know, we should have bigger Pokemon. How do we do this?
terribly. That's how. Pokemon evolve, let's go beyond. Pokemon use moves, let's go beyond. Pokemon have types, let's go beyond. Pokemon have that niche, lightly lore touched on ability to shrink, let's do the opposite. Terrible lore, lazy mechanic, Gigantamax designs are just even more ridiculous megas. At least with Z moves, megas, and Terra, you can use them battle to battle, but for obvious reasons, you can't just Dynamax anywhere, so in a casual playthrough, you're pretty limited to when and where you can actually use the gimmick. Before moving on to Terra, I want to do a quick recap so we're on the same page. Things like Megas, Totems, and Z Crystals are good, because the lore is well thought out. It ties directly into the player's journey. You can use it pretty much as often or little as you'd like, and it can sometimes make a specific region feel so much more unique. For example, Megas are sweet, and having them appear in other regions like Hoenn or Alola doesn't take away from them at all. But Z Crystals and Totems are so cool to me because not only do they completely turn the status quo of Pokemon on its head, it's implemented into the game in such a way that it almost feels like part of the people's culture. Because, well, I guess it is. What I'm trying to say is a good gimmick can be brought back, but doesn't always need to be. Yeah, I may have gotten a little more opinionated than I had liked on these gimmicks, but it was all to try and convey necessary information on what constitutes, get this, in my opinion, a good gimmick. Let's go over the newest gimmicks as of this video's release, Terastalization, and Paradox Pokemon, I guess. For the old heads watching this, Terra can be summed up like this. Pokemon changes type, keeps its original stab, gains new stab, defensively becomes new type, stupid, ugly hat. Honestly, I think Terastalization is a really good idea. In fact, I'd argue it's the best gimmick in terms of gameplay, offering the most variety and strategy of any of the gimmicks. More often than not used as a defensive tool to get around incoming super effective attacks. A much needed breath of fresh air while power creep has been stronger than it's ever been. But you can also use it offensively to do some major damage. I think when it comes to mechanics, this gimmick gets an 11 out of 10. However, my main gripes with it are, the lore is, alright. Terra on its own has pretty good standing in the story, but what really gets me is the hats. I get it, it's a kid's game, maybe shading the crystals isn't enough on its own, you know, don't want another Arceus flying, Arceus steel mix up, but why was this your solution? I'm not saying Pokemon has ever been super grounded in reality, but I feel like they try and make everything somewhat plausible, and what isn't plausible to me is that these Pokemon get a fucking man-made chandelier or battle axe on their head when they Terra. You know how Megas have a symbol next to their name when you do the do? And you know how Pokemon types have those little symbols? BDSP comes to mind. Why not do that? You do that to a lesser degree already in the trading card game. Flesh it out, make it work. This looks much better than this. On to Paradox forms. The best way I can put into words my feelings on Paradox Pokemon is to just send you over to my other video discussing regional variants versus convergent Pokemon, as I feel pretty similar to Paradox Pokemon as I do to regional variants, except Paradox Pokemon are stupid. I mean, at least the past ones are cool looking. These are just robots. They're all robots. And I'm a huge fan of robots, obviously, but like, come on. I'm just glad they at least imply they're from different timelines and not actually from our future and past. Well, I mean, I guess it's in the name. Glorified Pokedex filler and competitive player bait. Overall, for better or for worse, it's pretty clear Pokemon gimmicks are here to stay. And although I find some of them pretty weak, there are exceptional gimmicks and features, both old and new, making their way into the world of Pokemon, and Game Freak has shown they know how to do things right. And with Pokemon Legends ZA in development and no announcements of any new mainline game almost 2 years after Scarlet and Violet's release, I'm hopeful that they may be finally taking their time to make new, clever, fun, and intricate features in their future titles. Doesn't matter though, they scammed me into buying Sword and Shield, and for that crime, Gen 10's getting pirated.